The mist clung to the cemetery like a shroud, weaving between weathered headstones as Martin leaned on his shovel. 30 years as gravedigger had taught him to read the living better than the dead. That's why the bitter-faced man approaching, expensive suit, clenched jaw, caught his attention. First visit in what seemed decades, judging by the overgrown plot he headed toward. Martin watched silently as the man stood before his father's grave, something clutched in his hand that wasn't flowers. Whatever secrets lay buried here went deeper than 6 feet. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in this haunting family mystery. The morning light filtered through the mist as Martin observed the stranger. 30 years of tending to the dead had weathered Martin's face like the stones he worked among. His calloused hands bore the marks of countless graves dug, countless farewells witnessed. The cemetery was his domain, a quiet kingdom where he ruled with shovel and rake, finding peace among those who no longer suffered. Unlike the living who avoided his gaze when they passed him in town. Gravedigger, they'd whisper, as if his profession made him something other than human. Martin had learned to wear their discomfort like a second coat, though the loneliness had carved a hollow space within him that echoed with each spadeful of earth he displaced. His wife had left 15 years ago, unable to bear the perpetual scent of soil that clung to him, the quiet man he'd become after burying so many stories. His daughter called on holidays, her voice always tinged with relief when their brief conversations ended. Martin understood. Death made people uncomfortable, and he had become its custodian. All he wanted now was to finish restoring the abandoned eastern section of the cemetery, a simple goal that gave purpose to his days. The Historical Society had finally approved his proposal to preserve the century-old graves that told the town's forgotten stories. But Harrison Wells, the new cemetery board director, had other plans. Harrison had announced at yesterday's town meeting, his voice carrying across the community center. Your project is unnecessary sentimentality. Those plots will be repurposed for modern needs. The room had fallen silent as Harrison displayed sleek renderings of a memorial garden that would erase the history Martin had dedicated himself to preserving. Our gravedigger seems to think his expertise qualifies him to make decisions about progress, Harrison had continued, prompting uncomfortable laughter. But digging holes doesn't make one a historian or a businessman. The public humiliation burned in Martin's chest, even now as he watched the bitter-faced visitor. Something about the man's rigid posture, the white-knuckled grip on whatever he held, resonated with Martin's own unspoken grief. Perhaps they were both fighting to preserve something others deemed worthless. Memories that the world seemed determined to bury deeper than any grave Martin had ever dug. Martin watched the bitter-faced visitor for a few more moments before returning to his work. The eastern section needed attention, crumbling headstones from the 1800s telling stories of the town's founders that Harrison seemed determined to erase. As Martin knelt to clear debris from a child's grave, the crunch of expensive shoes on gravel announced trouble. Still wasting time on these worthless rocks, I see. Harrison Wells stood over him, tablet in hand, designer sunglasses reflecting Martin's weathered face back at him. These are people, Harrison. Our town's history. Martin continued working, fingers gently brushing moss from the faded inscription. Harrison laughed. People. They're bones and dust. Nobody remembers them. Nobody cares. He tapped his tablet screen. The board meeting's been moved up. We vote on the Memorial Garden project tomorrow, not next month. Martin looked up sharply. That's not enough time to prepare my presentation. That's rather the point. Harrison smiled thinly. Progress waits for no one, especially not gravediggers. The way he said Martin's profession, like it was something shameful, made Martin's jaw tighten. But he said nothing as Harrison walked away, leaving him alone with the dead who never judged him for the dirt beneath his fingernails. The board meeting was worse than Martin had imagined. He'd stayed up all night preparing notes, gathering historical records, but Harrison had transformed the small conference room. Digital displays showed sleek renderings of the proposed memorial garden, complete with a water feature where the oldest graves currently stood. As you can see, Harrison was saying as Martin slipped into the back row, this renovation will increase revenue by 40% and bring our cemetery into the modern era. When Martin's turn came to speak, Harrison interrupted constantly. Martin, while your enthusiasm is charming, these financial projections are amateur at best. Harrison distributed glossy folders to the board members. Our gravedigger friend clearly doesn't understand basic economics. I understand that we're erasing history, Martin countered, his voice quieter than he'd intended. Harrison's smile was predatory. History, or just old stones nobody visits. When was the last time anyone brought flowers to the eastern section? The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. One checked his watch. "We appreciate your perspective, Martin," the chairwoman said finally. "But we need to consider the cemetery's financial future." Martin left with the weight of defeat pressing down on his shoulders, heavier than any coffin he'd ever lowered. The final humiliation came 3 days later. Martin arrived at work to find surveying stakes driven through the eastern section, orange tape crisscrossing the ancient graves. A small crowd had gathered: board members, the mayor, local press. Harrison stood at the center, posing for photographs with an oversized ceremonial shovel. "Ah, Martin. Perfect timing." Harrison's voice boomed across the hallowed ground. "We're just about to break ground on progress. Perhaps you'd like to watch how it's really done." He gestured to Martin's worn shovel. "Though I imagine our equipment is a bit more sophisticated than what you're used to." Laughter rippled through the crowd. The mayor looked embarrassed but said nothing. "These graves are protected by state historical preservation laws," Martin said quietly. Harrison's smile faltered momentarily. What was that? "Before becoming a gravedigger, I was a historical preservation attorney in Boston for 15 years. Martin reached into his weather jacket, pulling out a document. "I filed the paperwork last month. The eastern section is now officially designated as a historical landmark." The crowd fell silent. Harrison's face reddened as he snatched the papers. This is... Harrison sputtered. Martin simply retrieved his shovel and returned to work, the whispers behind him growing louder. He hadn't practiced law in decades, but some skills never left you, like knowing when to dig in and protect what mattered, no matter how forgotten it might seem to others. A silver-haired woman observed from her town car, jotting notes in a leather-bound journal. "Interesting," she murmured to her assistant. "Call my office. Tell them Eleanor Blackwood wants to meet this gravedigger immediately." The morning after the confrontation, Martin arrived at the cemetery earlier than usual. The eastern section, with its weathered headstones and ancient oaks, stood peaceful in the dawn light, no longer threatened by surveying stakes and ceremonial shovels. He ran his fingers over the preservation notice he'd posted at the entrance, feeling a strange mixture of pride and nostalgia. It had been years since he'd cited a preservation statute or filed legal paperwork. The familiar rush of protecting something vulnerable had returned, reminding him of the attorney he once was before grief and disillusionment had led him to this quieter life. As he worked, Martin noticed a sleek black town car parked just beyond the cemetery gates. The same one from yesterday. Through the morning mist, he could make out the silhouette of someone watching him. He continued his work, pretending not to notice. By mid-morning, Harrison arrived with 2 men in expensive suits. Martin recognized them immediately as the type of corporate attorneys he used to face across negotiation tables, sharks in tailored clothing. "This is him," Harrison said, pointing at Martin. "The gravedigger who thinks he knows the law." One of the attorneys stepped forward. "Mr. Holloway, I'm Jeffrey Winters from Caldwell & Winters. We represent Evergreen Memorial Properties. We've reviewed your preservation filing and found several irregularities." Martin leaned on his shovel. "Is that so?" "Indeed. The historical significance claims are tenuous at best. We've already filed a motion to have the designation reviewed and revoked." The attorney handed Martin a thick envelope. "You'll find all the relevant documents here. The hearing is scheduled for next week." Harrison couldn't contain his smirk. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Martin? That you could derail a multi-million-dollar development with some paperwork and sentimentality?" Martin accepted the envelope calmly. "I thought it was worth trying to protect the dead who can't protect themselves." "How poetic," Harrison sneered. "Save the poetry for your eulogy for this cemetery. Because when we're done, this place will be unrecognizable." After they left, Martin opened the envelope. The motion was comprehensive, attacking every aspect of his filing with corporate precision. They'd done their homework, finding technical flaws in his rusty legal work. The hearing was scheduled for Tuesday, just 5 days away. That evening, as Martin was locking up the cemetery office, a gentle voice called from behind him. "Mr. Holloway?" He turned to find an elegant silver-haired woman standing there, her posture regal despite her advanced years. "I'm Eleanor Blackwood," she said, extending her hand. "I wonder if we might speak for a moment?" Martin recognized the name immediately. Eleanor Blackwood was a legend in Massachusetts. Old money, older influence, and a reputation for environmental and historical conservation that had made her both admired and feared in equal measure. Of course, Ms. Blackwood, I observed your confrontation with that developer yesterday. Quite impressive. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, studied him. You're not just a gravedigger, are you? Martin smiled faintly. Sometimes we become what we need to be. Indeed. She nodded toward the eastern section. Walk with me. As they strolled among the ancient graves, Eleanor asked thoughtful questions about the cemetery's history. Martin found himself sharing stories of the forgotten souls resting there, the Revolutionary War veterans, the victims of the 1918 influenza, the former slaves buried with dignity when such treatment was rare. Harrison doesn't understand what he's destroying, Martin said finally. These aren't just stones, they're chapters of our town story. Eleanor stopped before a simple headstone. And what's your chapter in this story, Mr. Holloway? A Boston attorney who became a gravedigger, that's not a common career trajectory. Martin hesitated. Few people knew his past. My wife and daughter are buried in Boston. After I lost them, courtrooms seemed meaningless. I needed quiet, purpose. I found both here. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. And now you're fighting again, trying to. But my legal skills are rusty, and Harrison has resources I don't. Resources can be found, Eleanor said simply. What you have, conviction, is rarer. The next morning, Martin was surprised to find a package waiting at the cemetery office. Inside was a leather portfolio containing detailed historical records of the eastern section, burial permits dating to 1795, correspondence from the Civil War era, and photographs documenting notable funerals and monuments. A simple note read, "Tools for your arsenal." E.B. Martin spent the weekend immersed in research, his legal mind reawakening. The documents Eleanor provided revealed something Harrison had overlooked. The eastern section contained the graves of 3 signatories to the state constitution, making it automatically eligible for historical protection under a statute that couldn't be challenged on technical grounds. On Monday, Martin filed a supplemental brief with the Historical Commission. By that afternoon, Harrison was storming across the cemetery, waving papers. What the hell is this? He demanded, thrusting the documents at Martin. Where did you get this information? Martin continued raking leaves calmly. Public records. Available to anyone who takes the time to look. This is sabotage. My investors are getting nervous. The board is asking questions. Harrison's composure was cracking. Who's helping you? No gravedigger suddenly becomes a legal expert overnight. Perhaps I'm not just a gravedigger, Martin replied. Just as this isn't just a plot of land to be developed. Harrison stepped closer, lowering his voice. Listen carefully. I've invested everything in this project. Everything. If it fails, I'm ruined. Do you understand? I can't walk away. For the first time, Martin saw something beneath Harrison's arrogance, desperation. You're leveraged too deeply, he realized aloud. That's why you can't compromise on the design. Harrison's silence confirmed it. There are alternatives, Martin offered. The western expansion area could. There's no time for redesigns. Harrison hissed. The investors want results now. The board wants revenue now. Even if it means destroying irreplaceable history. Harrison's laugh was bitter. History doesn't pay bills, Holloway. At the hearing the next day, the Historical Commission's meeting room was unexpectedly full. Local historians, preservation advocates, and several elderly residents had come to support the cemetery's protection. Martin noticed Eleanor sitting quietly in the back, observing. When Martin presented his supplemental evidence about the state constitution signatories, the commission members exchanged impressed glances. Harrison's attorneys attempted to argue that the graves could be relocated, but Martin was prepared. State Statute 47.3b specifically prohibits the relocation of historically significant burial sites except in cases of natural disaster or public health emergency. Martin cited from memory. Neither condition applies here. As the hearing progressed, Harrison grew increasingly agitated. During a recess, he cornered Martin in the hallway. You've ruined me, he whispered furiously. When this fails, I'll lose everything. My reputation, my company. Mr. Davidson. Eleanor Blackwood's voice cut through the tension as she approached. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance at First National Trust. Your primary investor, if I'm not mistaken. Harrison paled. Ms. Blackwood, I didn't realize you were involved in this matter. I'm involved in many matters, particularly those concerning our community's heritage. Her smile was pleasant, but her eyes were steel. Perhaps we should discuss a compromise that preserves both history and your financial interests? My foundation occasionally provides bridge financing for projects that demonstrate appropriate cultural sensitivity. The transformation in Harrison was immediate. I would be very interested in such a discussion, Ms. Blackwood. When the commission reconvened, Harrison's attorneys requested a 30-day continuance to develop an alternative proposal that would preserve the eastern section while allowing modified development elsewhere. As people filed out after the hearing, Eleanor briefly touched Martin's arm. "Well done, counselor," she murmured. Sometimes the most powerful tool is simply knowing which graves shouldn't be disturbed. Martin watched her walk away, realizing that some battles weren't won with money or power, but with a quiet determination to protect what matters, whether it was forgotten graves or buried parts of oneself. What's your story? I'd love to know where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to stand up for something important that others had forgotten. Comment below, and let me know what corner of the world you're tuning in from. The next morning, Martin found an unmarked envelope on his desk containing cemetery photographs from 1978 and a note. "Davidson isn't your enemy. Ask about Project Cornerstone and the bodies they already moved. They'll silence you both if necessary." Martin stared at the photographs spread across his kitchen table, the grainy images from 1978 showing excavation work at the cemetery's western edge. The notes warning about Project Cornerstone had sent him down a rabbit hole of research for the past 3 days. What he discovered made his blood run cold. He picked up his phone and dialed Eleanor. "I need to meet with you," he said when she answered. "It's about Davidson and something called Project Cornerstone." There was a long pause on the line. "My office. 1 hour." Eleanor's foundation occupied a restored Victorian mansion on the edge of downtown. When Martin arrived, she led him to a wood-paneled study and closed the door. "Before you say anything," she began, "understand that some matters are better left buried." Martin placed the photographs on her desk. "Like these." Eleanor examined them, her expression unreadable. "Where did you get these?" "Anonymous delivery. But I've been digging through county archives and newspaper microfiche." Project Cornerstone was a government installation built in 1978. The official records show they purchased land adjacent to the cemetery, but these photos suggest they expanded onto cemetery grounds. And what do you think happened? I think they disturbed graves without proper documentation or relocation permits. And I think Davidson knows about it because his father's construction company was the contractor. Martin leaned forward. "What I don't understand is why someone would warn me that they'll silence us both." Eleanor sighed deeply. Because Project Cornerstone wasn't just any installation. It was a classified research facility. The kind that doesn't appreciate exposure. What kind of research? The kind that ended with the facility being decommissioned and sealed in 1986. She met his gaze. Martin Davidson's development plan includes breaking ground precisely where that facility was buried. And if they dig there, they'll find things that powerful people want to remain hidden. Martin ran a hand through his hair. So Davidson isn't just after profit. He's being pressured to pave over evidence, or he doesn't know what he's about to uncover. Eleanor stood. Either way, we need to act quickly. The commission's continuance ends in 3 days. The next morning, Martin met with Harrison Davidson at a quiet coffee shop downtown. The developer looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," Martin said. "Ms. Blackwood suggested it might be in my interest." Harrison stirred his untouched coffee. "Though I don't see what we have to discuss." Martin slid an envelope across the table. "Project Cornerstone." Harrison's hand froze mid-stir. "Where did you hear that name? I know your father's company built it. I know it was on cemetery land. And I know your development plans will expose whatever is buried there. You don't know what you're talking about." But Harrison's voice lacked conviction. "Someone thinks I do. Someone who warned me we're both in danger." Martin leaned forward. "Who's pressuring you, Harrison?" The developer's eyes darted around the cafe. "I can't discuss this here." "Then where?" "The cemetery. Tonight at a eastern section by the old oak." Harrison stood abruptly. "Come alone." Martin spent the afternoon preparing. He made copies of all his research and sealed them in envelopes addressed to his law partner, a district attorney, and a journalist friend, with instructions to open if he didn't check in by morning. He also called Eleanor. "He's agreed to meet. Tonight at the cemetery. That's either very good or very bad," she replied. "I'll have people nearby, just in case." No, Martin insisted. If he sees anyone else, he'll bolt. "This might be our only chance. At least wear this." Eleanor met him an hour before the meeting, handing him what looked like an ordinary pen. "It records audio and has GPS. Clip it to your pocket." The cemetery was eerily quiet as darkness fell. Martin arrived early, positioning himself near the massive oak tree. The graves around him dated back to the Civil War, their weathered stones tilted at odd angles. At precisely 8, headlights swept across the entrance gates. A black SUV parked, and Harrison emerged, followed by another man Martin didn't recognize. Tall, military-bearing, with close-cropped gray hair. "I told you to come alone," Harrison hissed as they approached. "Mr. Davidson insisted on my presence," the stranger said, extending his hand. "Colonel James Mercer, retired. I represent certain government interests in this matter." Martin didn't take the offered hand. "What interests would those be?" "The kind that prefer discretion." Mercer smiled thinly. "Mr. Davidson has informed me of your concerns about the western section of this property. My concerns are about illegal grave desecration and cover-up." Ancient history, Mercer dismissed. "What matters now is moving forward constructively. Mr. Davidson's project has been modified to avoid disturbing any historically significant areas, while conveniently paving over evidence of Project Cornerstone." Mercer's smile vanished. "That name isn't one you should use casually, counselor." "Is that a threat?" "A professional courtesy. Some doors, once open, can't be closed." Harrison looked miserable. "Martin, please. Take the win on the eastern section. The commission will approve our revised plan on Friday." "And what about the families whose ancestors were removed without permission? Don't they deserve to know?" "They're long dead," Mercer cut in. "Unlike you." The implied threat hung in the night air. "I have evidence," Martin said carefully. "Documentation that proves what happened here in 1978. "Do you?" Mercer seemed amused. "Or do you have a few photographs and speculation? Hardly enough to justify risking your career. Or more." Martin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Simplicity itself. You accept Davidson's compromise on the eastern cemetery section. The commission approves the modified development. Everyone wins, except the truth." "The truth," Mercer said softly, "is overrated." Martin looked between them, Harrison desperate and afraid, Mercer calculating and dangerous. The weight of Eleanor's recording pen seemed suddenly heavy in his pocket. "And if I refuse?" Mercer shrugged. "Then, unfortunately, we'll need to explore alternatives, starting with a thorough examination of your law practice. I understand the Bar Association takes ethics violations quite seriously. I've done nothing unethical. Evidence can be such a malleable thing." Mercer checked his watch. "You have until the commission meeting to decide. Accept the compromise and walk away, or pursue this matter and face consequences I don't think you're prepared for." As they turned to leave, Harrison paused. "For what it's worth, I didn't know about any of this when I started. My father never told me what they did here." Martin stood alone among the graves after they departed, facing an impossible choice. Accept a cover-up that dishonored the dead and conceal potential crimes, or risk everything, perhaps even his life, to expose a truth that powerful forces were determined to keep buried. The old oak's branches swayed above him, as if the ancient tree had witnessed this same human drama before. The eternal struggle between expedience and justice, between forgetting and remembering. Martin couldn't sleep that night. The weight of Mercer's threats pressed against his chest like a stone. By dawn, he made his decision. He called Eleanor first. "I need everything we have on Project Cornerstone ready for the commission meeting. Are you sure?" Her voice was tight with concern. "Harrison called me. He said these people are dangerous. That's why we can't back down." Martin spent the day preparing. He organized the photographs, the old maps showing the original cemetery boundaries, and most importantly, the recording of Mercer's threats. But his most valuable asset was something he hadn't mentioned to anyone, his father's journal. The commission room was packed when Martin arrived. Harrison avoided his gaze, While Mercer sat confidently beside a group of suited men, the chairman called the meeting to order. "Before we vote on the Davidson proposal," Martin announced, "I have evidence of federal crimes committed on this property that directly impact today's decision." Mercer's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. In 1978, a classified operation called Project Cornerstone illegally exhumed and relocated remains from the western section of Oakwood Cemetery, Martin continued. These actions violated multiple federal statutes and the rights of descendants. "These are baseless accusations," Mercer interrupted smoothly. "Mr. Keene has no credible evidence." Martin placed his father's journal on the table. "My father was Thomas Keene, chief medical examiner for this county from 1975 to 1989. He documented everything." The color drained from Mercer's face. "My father was coerced into silence, just as Mr. Mercer attempted to silence me last night." Martin played the recording of their conversation, Mercer's threats echoing through the stunned room. "Furthermore," Martin continued, "I've identified 17 families whose ancestors were removed without consent. Their representatives are present today." An elderly woman stood. "My grandfather was buried there in 1932. We were told his grave was lost to poor record-keeping." Others rose, each with similar stories. Mercer leaned toward his colleagues, whispering urgently. One by one, they distanced themselves from him. "This is a local zoning matter," Mercer finally said, his composure cracking. "National security considerations supersede. Not when they involve criminal conspiracy and civil rights violations," Martin countered. "The U.S. Attorney's Office has opened an investigation based on the evidence I provided." Two men in dark suits entered the room, badges in hand. "James Mercer, we need you to come with us." As Mercer was escorted out, he hissed at Martin, "You have no idea what you've done." The commission unanimously rejected the development proposal. Harrison approached Martin afterward, looking both relieved and terrified. "They'll come after you," he warned. "People like Mercer have contingency plans." "Probably," Martin agreed. "But some things are worth the risk." In the weeks that followed, the story broke nationally. Project Cornerstone was revealed to have been an unauthorized radiation experiment using human remains. Several former officials faced charges, though many of the principal architects of the program had died years before. The families received formal apologies and compensation, though nothing could truly make amends for the desecration of their ancestors' resting places. A memorial was established on the western grounds, listing the names of those who had been disturbed. Martin received both death threats and awards. His law practice suffered initially, then flourished as he became known for taking on powerful interests. He kept his father's journal in his office as a reminder that justice, however delayed, was always worth pursuing. The old oak at Oakwood Cemetery continued its silent watch, its roots now protected by a permanent conservation order. Some said that on quiet nights, the rustling of its leaves sounded almost like whispered thanks from those who could finally rest in peace. 5 years after the Oakwood Cemetery scandal, Martin's life had settled into a new rhythm. His law practice now occupied a renovated Victorian building downtown, where he specialized in cases involving corporate accountability and civil rights. The threats had eventually subsided, replaced by a quiet respect even from former adversaries. On this crisp autumn morning, Martin walked through Oakwood Cemetery, now protected as a historical landmark. The western section had been transformed into a serene memorial garden, with stone markers bearing the names of those who had been disturbed. He placed flowers at his father's grave, feeling the weight of secrets finally lifted from both their shoulders. "Your dad would be proud," came a familiar voice. Old Harrison, now retired but still a regular visitor, nodded approvingly. "I hope so," Martin replied, breathing deeply of the clean air. Later, at his office, Martin sorted through his mail when an unmarked envelope caught his attention. Inside was a faded photograph of a military installation and a handwritten note. Project Cornerstone was just the beginning. There were others. "We need your help." The return address was for a small town in Nevada he'd never heard of. As Martin studied the photograph, he noticed a familiar face in the background, younger, but unmistakably James Mercer, standing beside someone whose features reminded Martin of his own father. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you enjoyed this story. What do you think Martin will discover next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.